Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we really try to unpack complex topics, turning that raw information into clear insights for you. Today we're diving into something just fundamental, really, to how we interact and how economies run. The fascinating evolution of sales. Our sources for this are pretty extensive. We've got a doctoral level study tracing sales right from ancient times to, well, the cutting edge future, all backed by solid data, economic trends.
Indeed. And our mission here really is to help you understand how sales has shaped our world. I mean, profoundly. And it continues to shape it. We're talking everything from the simplest swap of goods right through to these incredibly complex digital transactions we see today. We'll look at some, frankly, surprising ways it's evolved and what that actually means for how value gets created and, exchanged in society.
It's fascinating when you think about it. Every single time you buy something, anything, you're basically participating in this process that's, thousands of years old. But how did we get from, say, bartering wool for grain all the way to AI predicting what you might buy next? That's what we're going to try and unravel for you today. By the end, you should have a much deeper understanding of sales, not just as a business thing, but as a real driving force in history, in progress. So let's kick off maybe with a high-level view. When we say sales, what exactly are we talking about? Because our source defines it in a really interesting, broad way. It's not just the transaction itself.
Right. At its absolute core, sales is that transactional process. Transferring ownership could be a good, a service, even a right, like intellectual property from seller to buyer, usually for money, the value exchange. But here's where it gets really interesting. It also represents that point, that critical moment of monetization in value chains. It reflects so much more: market equilibrium, supply and demand dynamics, the whole psychology of persuasion, even behavioral economics. It's much bigger than just a simple exchange.
It's a much richer picture than just, swiping a card or clicking buy.
Yeah.
So it's not just the act, it's an economic indicator.
Precisely. Yeah, think about it from the whole business ecosystem view. Sales is, well, it's a function, right? You've got the sales department prospecting, engaging clients, negotiating, closing deals, that whole process. And it's also a critical metric. It shows revenue, obviously, but also things like product market fit, how well the company's performing overall. Economically, sales data, it's gold. It acts as a leading indicator for national income, GDP, consumer confidence, those business cycle ups and downs, even how fast new tech gets adopted. It really is a pulse on the economy.
A pulse on the economy. I like that. Okay, it's clearly foundational. Let's unpack this history then. Let's trace it back. You mentioned ancient origins. It wasn't always about money, right? It started much simpler.
Oh, way simpler. We're talking prehistoric times, maybe around 10,000 BCE. The barter economy was basically it. You exchanged goods directly, no standardized money involved. Think early settlements. Maybe a farmer trades surplus grain for, I don't know, a hunter's furs or tools made by an artisan. Direct exchange. And we actually have records. The Sumerians, around 3000 BCE, they documented sales wool, grain, using simple clay tablets.
Oh, clay tablets is the first sales receipt. Okay, so these weren't just local village swaps, though, were they? You mentioned trade routes, like the Silk Road. How did they scale things up?
Exactly. Those early trade routes are crucial. The Silk Road, kicking off around 130 BCE, that really catalyzed the first proper interregional sales systems, connecting vast areas. And even then, there was structure. We found Babylonian records, even older, maybe 2000 BCE, showing things like basic pricing tables and standard weights. These are essentially primitive sales contracts. It just shows that fundamental human drive, that need for exchange, and how we figured out ways to make it work, even across huge distances.
Okay, fast forward a bit. We get into the feudal and mercantilist periods, say 500 CE up to around 1700. Sounds like things start getting a bit more, formalized.
They definitely did. Coin-based sales start to take over from pure barter, which standardizes value, right? And marketplaces become more formal, often regulated spaces. You see the rise of traveling salesmen in medieval Europe, peddlers carrying goods from town to town. And then later, guild-controlled sales for artisans, setting standards and prices for specific crafts. And this period also brings us mercantilism, say 1500s to 1700s. This was more than just trade. It was a whole national economic strategy. Governments focused on maximizing exports, minimizing imports, and this led directly to the first really structured B2G, business-to-government sales, think selling timber for navies or supplies for armies, state-backed deals.
Right. And you mentioned something pivotal here, the link between sales and actual corporate value. That Dutch East India Company example in 1602. Why was that such a big deal?
Ah, yes. That was a game changer. Profound, really. In 1602, the Dutch East India Company wasn't just trading. It became the first company to issue stock, shares that people could buy. And critically, they started tracking their sales performance as a direct measure of shareholder value. So for the very first time, your wealth as an investor was directly tied to how much stuff that company sold. Sales became the engine, not just of exchange, but of capitalist growth in financial markets.
Hmm.
A huge shift.
Okay, engine of growth.
Mm-hmm.
Then comes the Industrial Revolution, 1760 to maybe 1900. That just changes everything, doesn't it? Suddenly you can make tons of stuff.
Exactly. Mass production arrives. And if you can make things en masse, you absolutely need to stimulate mass demand. You need mass selling. So this era gives rise to things we still recognize. The department store, like Macy's opening in 1858, suddenly huge variety under one roof, focused on the customer experience in the store. And it also sparks this huge growth in door-to-door selling. Think the Fuller Brush Man, starting around 1906, bringing products right to people's homes, a completely different model.
Different models reaching way more people. So these new methods, department stores, door-to-door.
What was the actual economic impact? Was it measurable?
Oh, absolutely measurable. Monumental, in fact. Between 1800 and 1900, U.S. GDP per capita, that's a key measure of wealth per person, it rose by over 500%. And a huge driver of that was the explosion in selling all these new industrial goods. So the Industrial Revolution wasn't just about factories making more things. It was equally about developing the methods to sell those things efficiently, at scale. Sales really starts to become a distinct profession here, a strategic discipline, not just a simple transaction. It's powering economies, shaping how we live.
The distinct profession. Okay, that leads us into the 20th century. And you mentioned this idea of the scientific salesman. Sales becomes almost a science. How did that happen? Yeah, it's a fascinating shift. A key moment was 1925. E.K. Strong publishes The Psychology of Selling. It wasn't just tips. It introduced structured, almost clinical techniques based on psychology. This is when you see the real rise of professional, trained sales forces. Think industries like pharmaceuticals, cars, big consumer goods companies. They started investing heavily in how to sell. And the scale was incredible. By 1929, get this, 1 in 3 American workers was involved in some kind of sales-related role. 1 in 3 shows how central it had become.
1 in 3.
Wow.
Okay, and then post-World War II, things shift again. Sales meets mass marketing. What does that look like on the ground?
Right. So say 1950 to 1980, that's the era where sales techniques become really popularized and frankly standardized. You get methodologies like spin selling that was revolutionary, focusing on asking questions, situation, problem, implication, need payoff, to uncover needs, not just pushing features, or BANT qualification, a simple framework. Does the prospect have the budget, authority, need, and timeline? A structured way to see if a deal is even possible. These weren't just buzzwords. They fundamentally changed the conversation. And sales forces just scaled massively. Coca-Cola, for example, had like 3,500 reps globally by 1960. IBM's sales training became legendary, setting the standard for B2B selling. And the numbers. U.S. retail sales ballooned from $123 billion in '51 to over $750 billion by 1980. Just huge growth fueled by these more professional approaches.
Professional and scalable. Okay, then the computers arrive. The digital age, CRM, e-commerce, data. What was the impact of things like customer relationship management, CRM, and software as a service, SaaS?
Ah, the digital transformation. Yeah, the 90s and 2000s, that's when CRM and SaaS really take hold and change the game again. Salesforce.com launching in '99 was huge. It put sophisticated CRM tools, previously only affordable for massive companies, into the cloud, accessible to almost anyone. It democratized data-driven sales. Big players like Oracle, SAP, Adobe, they developed powerful tools too, enabling things like inside sales models, selling effectively over the phone or online, not face-to-face. And the market just exploded. That global CRM market went from maybe $500 million in '99 to nearly $50 billion by 2020. It shows this massive shift towards managing customer relationships through technology and data.
Data-driven. And speaking of digital shifts, you can't ignore the Amazon effect. That feels like it just fundamentally rewired how we as consumers approach buying anything. Can you unpack that e-commerce explosion?
Absolutely. It's hard to overstate Amazon's impact and the broader e-commerce boom from, say, 2010 to 2020. By 2020, Amazon controlled something like 38% of the entire U.S. e-commerce market, just massive dominance, and globally. Online sales hit $4.2 trillion in 2020. That was up from $1.3 trillion just 6 years earlier in 2014. Phenomenal growth. And this complexity, this shift to online and multiple touch points, it forced sales roles to evolve further. You started seeing this real specialization into roles like SDRs, sales development reps, who focus purely on qualifying initial leads, then AEs, account executives, who focus on closing the deal, and CSMs, customer success managers, focused on keeping clients happy after the sale. This specialization personalization was all about optimizing each stage of a more complex buyer journey. And metrics like CAC, customer acquisition costs, became super important. How much does it cost to get that new customer in this new digital world? Efficiency became key.
Specialization and efficiency. Okay, which brings us pretty much up to date. We're talking data-driven, AI-augmented, hyper-personalized sales. It feels like things are moving faster than ever, almost futuristic.
It does feel that way, doesn't it? What's really fascinating now is how AI isn't just a tool anymore. It's becoming like an integral partner in the sales process. Our sources show something like 70% of top-performing sales teams are already using AI. For what? Well, predicting which deals are likely to close, scoring leads so reps focus on the best prospects, personalizing messages at scale, things humans couldn't do alone. You have tools like Gong analyzing sales calls, HubSpot managing workflows, ZoomInfo providing incredibly detailed company data. They automate so much of the pipeline intelligence. And it works. Companies using this kind of data-driven personalization, they're seeing conversion rates jump by maybe 20%. But beyond just efficiency, AI changes the game in terms of predictability and scalability. It's about trying to know what a customer might need, sometimes even before they know it, and reaching them in the right way.
Knowing before they know. Wow. Okay, and thinking about recent times, the pandemic obviously shifted things dramatically. How has the actual act of selling changed post-COVID?
Yeah, the pandemic accelerated trends that were already starting. We've definitely landed in a world of omni-channel and hybrid selling. It's this seamless blend or expected blend of in-person meetings, digital interactions, remote calls. Buyers expect to engage across all these channels, and the buyer is much more in control now. B2B buyers, for instance, might use 10 or more different channels, websites, reviews, social media, webinars, before they even want to talk to a sales rep. They do their own research first, and companies have responded. Something like 65% of B2B firms have shifted to a digital-first sales model. That's not just a temporary fix. It feels like a permanent change in how deals get done.
Digital first. Okay, to really grasp the scale we're talking about now, can you give us a snapshot? What do global sales look like today? Put those early clay tablets in perspective.
It's staggering, really. Global retail sales for 2024 are estimated around $31.7 trillion. Trillion! Just to give you a sense, that's nearly double the GDP of the entire European Union combined. That's the scale of global commerce driven by sales. Within that, global e-commerce is projected at $6.3 trillion this year, still growing fast, and the tools supporting this. The global B2B sales software market alone is worth about $164 billion. Huge investment in the infrastructure of selling. How many people are doing this? Estimates suggest over 64 million sales reps worldwide. And the fastest growing piece of this puzzle, it's AI-based sales enablement tools. That sector is projected to grow at a crazy 25% compound annual growth rate through 2030. That's where the energy investment are going.
25% CAGR. Wow. It truly is incredible when you trace that line from simple barter, a direct swap, to this immensely complex data-fueled, AI-assisted global system.
It really is. And if you connect the dots, look at the big picture, this evolution tells us so much about how humans define and exchange value. It's changed dramatically. We went from that basic bartering, face-to-face persuasion to today's AI-powered precision targeting, often using complex algorithms to predict behavior. So sales today, it's really not just about closing the deal anymore. It's much more about creating ongoing value, understanding the entire customer journey deeply, and making sure sales aligns with the bigger purpose of the organization. In a way, sales has become a mirror. It reflects our evolving relationship with technology, our changing ideas about trust, and fundamentally what it means to connect a human need with a solution in an increasingly complex world.
A mirror reflecting our changes. That's a great way to put it. So for you listening, what does all this mean? Why should you care about the history of sales? Well, understanding this isn't just for people in business or sales roles. It genuinely helps you understand how economies function and grow, how innovations actually spread through society, and increasingly, how technology is mediating almost all our human interactions.
And thinking about that future, it definitely raises some big questions. What is the next frontier? Where is this all heading? Our sources point towards things like neuropersonalized sales, and also increasingly important ethical and sustainable sales practices, neuropersonalized. Essentially using deep, maybe even subconscious insights from cognitive science, maybe even brain activity, to tailor sales messages with just unprecedented precision. It's where behavior, personal values, and big data could converge.
Neuropersonalized sales. Think about that for a second. How might that change your experience as a consumer day to day?
Yeah.
And what massive ethical questions does that raise? Especially as AI gets even better at understanding human behavior, maybe manipulating it for commercial goals. Where do we draw the lines? It's a huge landscape opening up, full of possibilities, absolutely, but also some serious challenges to navigate. Definitely a deep dive for another day.